So thank you everyone for joining us for night 2 of our 3-part virtual discussion series on race and racism, brought to you by Wood Library in collaboration with Project R.E.A.L of the City of Rochester and the City of Canandaigua's Equity and Diversity Task Force. These series will address how race shapes mental health in communities, politics, and media. Each night is led by a group of wonderful panelists. Tonight we have returning for night 2, Dr. Sim Covington, the Chief Diversity Officer of FLCC. If you want to wave to everybody, Sim. And then we have the Educational Coordinator, Gaynelle Wethers. Ms. Wethers has a long history of leadership and service in Rochester community. She is also a former campaign manager to Mayor Lovely Warren. And if you want to give us a wave, yes. We have Assistant Professor Virgil Slade of African History at Hobart William Smith. And our final panelist, who will be arriving a little later tonight, is Dr. Khuram Hussain. He's the Associate Professor of Education and the VP for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Hobart William Smith. And returning again as our moderator for tonight's event is Lutisha Doucette, and she has, she's going to tell us some of the housekeeping rules for tonight's event.
Hello everyone, and I want to thank you for attending, and I saw the wonderful comment. I'm glad that y'all are here to learn and to hopefully take something from this and implement that in your own lives. So thank you again for being here and taking the time. Thank you to Alexis and the Wood Library for your partnership, and I'm loving this. On behalf of the R.E.A.L initiative of the City of Rochester, I think this is just important in these times that we're living in to be talking about race, racism, and the intersection and all the different facets of life, but also to ensure that we are taking meaningful action towards systems change, right? As well as attitudinal change. So thank you for having me here. So as was said, I'm your friendly moderator, maybe not so friendly moderator, because that's not the job of being a moderator, is to be nice, is to keep the conversation flowing. As you saw in the chat down there, right, I posted some ground rules because ground rules are great. If you have a question, type question. If you have a comment, type comment. And then what I'll be doing is after everybody speaks, I'll be reading and voicing your questions and comments to the panelists. Also, at the bottom of your screen are closed captions, and I'll show them right now. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see the captions appearing, right? If you're having trouble, just let me know, and we'll try to troubleshoot that for you, but you should be good with that. This is also being recorded, so hopefully, you know, mind your P's and Q's, right? As always, and we're gonna have a great night. And you probably won't see or hear from me unless absolutely needed and necessary. All right, and I will send it to Sim.
Good evening, everyone. Once again, my name is Dr. Sim Covington. Thank you very much for participating here in night 2. I'm going to take the opportunity to share my screen. Give me 1 second, please. Here we go. And I just want to verify. Can you see my screen? Yes? Thank you very much. All right. So the first thing I want to start with tonight is to pretty much talk about the dichotomy when it comes to race and politics overall and provide some historical context. Here we have a couple of pictures of some prominent politicians, obviously. The late, great Elijah Cummings, Kamala Harris, who's currently running for VP, Barack, Mike Pence, Donald Trump, to make sure that I have a balanced perspective when I'm having this conversation, because I think that balanced perspective is very important. And I want to talk about this dichotomy that takes place here in the United States. most of the time, if you speak to people and you ask people, are you a good person? Most people are going to say, yeah, I'm a good person. I'm a good person, right? But also, we also need to recognize part of the history of this country is that we have to create rules, laws, policies, memorandums, agreements, and treaties to protect humanity. So everyone thinks that they're a good person, but we also have to have rules and policies in place to protect humanity. The second dichotomy that I want to really show is that the founding fathers of this country, the land of the free, the home of the brave, independence from Great Britain, talking about independence on one hand, but many of our founding fathers also were slave owners, right? So we have so many different perspectives in regards to things not necessarily lining up, or divergent views or divergent perspectives within the same individual. As we look at history of this country, starting with Reconstruction and the 15th Amendment, there were a number of southern states, here I haven't read, were able to introduce legal codes that restricted the freedoms of Blacks. So even though we were doing things as a country on a national level, there were still states that were enforcing things to marginalize individuals who were coming from diverse backgrounds. Then we moved to the Jim Crow laws in this country in regards to segregationist laws that were used to disenfranchise Black and prevent them from voting, which is a part of our political process, including poll taxes, unfair literacy tests, and grandfather clauses. It's very important for me to share here that once the country started to get involved in regards to things that were happening on the state level, we started to have rogue agents engage in vigilante missions, obviously the starting of something such as the KKK, right? And what they would do would target Black churches and schools, because for a lot of African Americans, this is where our leaderships reside. As things continue to move forward, we have the 19th Amendment with the passing of women's right to vote. But I want to make it crystal clear, even when those women's rights were passed, this was not necessarily equally for all women in this country. Excuse me. Actually, today on Dr. Phil, for those of you who had the opportunity to see it, one of the things that came up was this concept of this new terminology, not so new now, but referring to specifically white women who are operating with a sense of entitlement and interfering with the rights of others, and referring to them as what's called Karens, right? So this was the topic today on Dr. Phil. And one of the things that was reinforced with this terminology was that in the past, when this women's right to vote was passed, there were still white women who were blocking Black women's right to vote. One of the panelists was implying that when the white women were blocking Black women's right to vote, they were operating under the duress of their husbands. So she felt that the blame should not be on the white women, but should be on their husbands instead. I think it's important to bring that into context today. I think in addition to that, it creates a dynamic where these individuals are trying to skirt around personal accountability. Let's go to New York City per se. In regards to the gentleman who was bird watching in Central Park, and then because a woman was walking her dog illegally, not on a leash, she called the cops. So a part of the political climate that we're dealing with is when individuals who are operating from a stance of privilege are using their power to weaponize law enforcement against people of color. It's very important to have that conversation, to recognize that conversation, and it's very much so a part of our political landscape, especially during this political climate, which is clearly very charged due to the level of activism that's taking place across the country. 1957, moving on to the Civil Rights Act, we had soldiers who were coming back from the Second World War, but individuals of color were still not treated with the same level of respect as their white counterparts. Then we get into the whole concept of redlining around property laws, right? Moving on to 55 with Rosa Parks, once again, Civil Rights Act of 1957, and then moving on to full voting rights in 1965. So in regards to everything that I'm sharing here, what I'm looking to reiterate is the fact that within this country, individuals who are coming from diverse backgrounds, when we're talking about race and politics, have and continue to fight for recognition, understanding, empathy, and a presence in the political process. A lot of times when we're hearing individuals who are running for president per se, they're talking about, one of the things that's very famous is this whole concept of drain the swamp. On HBO, there's currently a documentary that's being showed about the swamp in regards to big business in Washington, D.C. Last night, we had a little bit of a conversation around special interest groups. We want to make sure that if we are looking to have individuals who are representing the communities they serve, they need to make sure that they're representing everyone in that community, which reinforces from a DEI perspective the whole concept of inclusion. Numerous studies have found the following, that people of color, women, and those who are also living with a disability are not fully represented in the political landscape. Political careers tend to be occupied by white males, leaving others to be marginalized and making it harder to launch and maintain a parliamentary career. In regards to females, they are still dealing with the glass ceiling in regards to navigating their political career, in addition to the fact that they have to deal with glass ceiling in employment in general. Excuse me, and there's also a double standard. Whereas men are encouraged to be worldly, aggressive, and self-interested, women are still encouraged to be moral, self-sacrificing, dutiful, and domestic. Despite the removal of legal barriers to the political involvement of women and minorities, these groups often remain substantially underrepresented in politics. Part of that underrepresentation is that a lot of individuals, based on their past experience and things that they have witnessed, they don't trust the system, right? A lot of times when we see things happening on a political landscape, there's something that's said, that's repeatedly said, such as, well, we have to do an investigation. For so many people who are coming from marginalized background, that's a trigger. It triggers them because their process of an investigation is, quite frankly, what they perceive as being a cover-up. When we're having conversations with law enforcement or think about individuals who are looking to navigate the political landscape, it's important to have these real conversations, not only to foster understanding, but to open the world of dialogue so that people can understand different views, which I'm going to get to a little bit later. There has been a lot of evidence that typically minority lawmakers pay more attention to minority concerns, and African-American legislators are more likely than white Democrats to reflect the interests of their Black constituents. Race in politics also becomes palpable for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, race in politics reinforces the expected standard about what is perceived as acceptable in this country, right? So the first thing I want to say in regards to what's perceived as acceptable falls into a variety of things in regards to, such as what physical features are perceived as acceptable. Then we have colorism that's also taking place in regards to the political landscape. Clothing. A question that I would have, let me open up my screen a little bit more. A question that I would have is, what happened if Kamala Harris did her acceptance speech and she was wearing cornrows? Do we think that would have been a part of the political conversation? Absolutely, because Black women deal with that every day in the workplace in regards to what's considered professional attire or professional appearance. What's considered an acceptable education when it comes to race and politics? In regards to Kamala per se, her undergraduate is from an HBCU. For some people, that's going to trigger, and not in a positive way, but more so in a negative way. What's acceptable when it comes to intersectionality, relevant to sexuality? Kamala is in an interracial marriage. There are still plenty of people in this country who are against interracial marriage, and by default of that, she is going to lose their vote. I'm not necessarily endorsing her, but what I am saying is that there are a lot of palpable things that are playing itself out when it comes to race and politics in this country. In addition to that, representation of realities from those from marginalized backgrounds. So a lot of times individuals are like, well, you're just going to vote for this person because they fall into blah, 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 blah category. But for most people operate as one-issue voters, right? And people are looking for people who have a shared experience and a shared understanding. For a lot of individuals who are coming from marginalized backgrounds, they may have experience when it comes to poverty, inadequate health care, which we spoke about last night, poorly funded schools, interactions with law enforcement, which may not be as favorable. Something else that's going on very much so around race and politics right now, especially on a political landscape, is the fact that we are living in a cancel culture, and there is no longer any type of political objectivity. You have divergent views who are just looking to cancel out the perspective of others, which I personally perceive as being unhealthy. One of the things that I do as the chief diversity officer is that I actually step into dynamics where I can hear the perspective of others who do not think like me. I need to understand their perspective. Once again, I don't necessarily have to agree, but by automatically dismissing them, that only makes each side doubles down and just exacerbates the situation. Where's there room for dialogue? Where's there room for understanding, right? But I'm also going to talk a little bit in a moment about different views. Something else that's very important when it comes to race and politics in this country is media influence. Who controls the narrative in regards to people's perception? So depending on where individuals get their information, that may, have a strong influence on their worldview, how they perceive certain things. Last night I spoke a little about psychology when it comes to Pavlov's dog. So if every time you hear some type of negative comment, you see a person from a marginalized background, you no longer need to hear the comment. As soon as you see them, you're going to affiliate them with some type of negative context. If every time you hear criminal, you see a Black man, they no longer need to say criminal. You're just going to automatically associate them with this based on past experience. So the media influence is significant in regards to the narratives that are being put out there based on different sides, right? This is very much so a part of race and politics in this country. The last thing that I want to talk about is the following, especially because of the heightened sensitivity around law enforcement relevant to individuals who are coming from marginalized background. And as the other panelists have an opportunity to speak, just some things that I want to bring up is the whole concept of Black Lives Matter, and then we have on the other side, Back the Blue. And I like to always reiterate that people see life through the lens of their experience. I have a variety of things here. As I'm speaking to individuals who are coming from conservative backgrounds, they are sharing with me their perspective, and I'm also speaking to people who are coming from more of a liberal or social justice background. Here's some things that are coming up. Whereas some people see protests during COVID-19, other people see it as a double standard, especially when it comes to wearing these face masks. And then when we have these double standards that they perceive, we have chaos and people push back. Whereas some people see social justice, other people see chaos and disarray. If there is some type of alt-right narrative that is out there, and then Donald Trump does not automatically denounce it, people become very sensitive to that. But if there's chaos relevant to these protests, and then people who are supporting Black Lives Matter don't denounce it, the other side becomes sensitive to that. What are your thoughts? Human rights versus justified behavior in support of societal safety. No justice, no peace versus looting starts. When the looting starts, the shooting starts, right? This is where we are as a country. Defund the police versus defend the police. Portland, Chicago, New York, Wisconsin, democratic leadership versus necessary activism. Intention for sustainable change versus impact of exacerbating the situation. Lack of political support versus police disengagement. Because when things hit the fan, the blame game starts and then people start to question who's accountable. Last but not least, police reform and accountability boards versus police unions protecting the right of their officers. As we move towards November in this very charged political election, I think it's very important to have full context of the divergent views that are currently taking place in this country. And I also think it's very important that whoever is going to lead this country forward is going to be able to pull these divergent views together for the greater good of everyone in the United States. So I just wanted to open the discussion to show a very balanced perspective of things that are going on relevant to the political landscape, how race is definitely playing a major role, specifically in this year's election by default of the national climate. And I'm going to stop there. Virgil, it is on you.
Thank you so much for that, Sim. Hi, everyone. My name is Virgil Slade. I am a historian. I'm just busy pulling up my PowerPoint. And I just want to say how excited I am for the opportunity to kind of think with everybody today. I want to thank Alexis for this opportunity, and I want to say welcome to everybody wherever you are. Okay, as soon as I can get this as a full screen, I will begin. Okay. I have been asked to speak on race and politics. So let me begin with my understanding of politics, or the political. My understanding of the political is derived from French philosopher Jacques Rancière, who teaches us that the political is, quote, anything that divides society. As societal divides can potentially, and often do, manifest differently in different spaces, it implies that no divide is natural, but rather the product of human interaction. For example, while we can justifiably claim genetic difference in terms of how gender is assigned, thus allowing us a recourse to nature, what we cannot claim is that the manner in which this difference is analyzed is consistent through space and time. Women were once regarded as too emotional to participate in voting, for example. Thus, society was divided in terms of political rights, in keeping with how differences between those identified as men were analyzed compared to those regarded as women. In other words, when we speak about the political, what becomes important is never the notion of difference, but rather how this difference, whether real or perceived, is analyzed. I want to repeat that. When we speak about the political, what becomes important is never the notion of difference, but rather how this difference, whether real or perceived, is analyzed. I think everyone here tonight will agree that understandings of racial difference is one of the primary ways in which American society is divided. This begs the question, how have notions of racial difference been analyzed, both historically and in our present? To help answer this question, let us trace the origins of whiteness as it is understood in modern Western society. By the 1690s, extensive slave plantations dominated the Caribbean island of Barbados, which was controlled by the British. What is of particular importance for us to note is that by 1697, the distinction made between those of African descent and those of European descent was not made along racial, but rather religious lines. British settlers and plantation owners were referred to as Christian, and the enslaved Africans were referred to as Negroes. As you may imagine, only men recognized as Christian were allowed to participate in the political process. However, by 1697, there were increasingly more free black men who started agitating for the right to vote. In accordance with the law of the time, voting rights were reserved for property-owning Christian men who were at least 21 years of age. So what do you imagine free black men did? They got baptized and now they could claim to be Christian. This form of equality was unthinkable to British colonialists. So what did they do? Easy. They changed the rules of the game. As enslaved and formerly enslaved people converted, the colonists changed the language in their law books to replace the word Christian with the word white. It was intentional and strategic. It declared, this new law, that every white man professing the Christian religion, the free and natural born subject of the King of England, or naturalized, who hath attained to the full age of 21 years, and hath 10 acres of freehold, shall be deemed a freeholder. Only those regarded as freeholders were allowed to vote. It was the first time that whiteness was used to determine voting eligibility. What we therefore see is that whiteness was invented to ensure the exclusion of free black men from the political process. This had nothing to do with racial difference and everything to do with maintaining power. I will repeat that. This had nothing to do with racial difference. This had everything to do with maintaining power. At this point, we should take stock. This ploy by the Christians, or whites as they now came to be known, was an exercise, first and foremost, of thought. Thought is typically characterized and associated with rationality or logic. So what was the logic here? Basically, to ensure that political power continued to reside solely with those regarded as of European descent. So how does one achieve this? You make the rules to ensure that this is the case. To this end, notions of racial difference replaced religion as a means to discern who was regarded as worthy of participating in the political process. But more importantly for our discussion, race was understood as biological. We have been taught to think of race as biological. After all, race supposedly makes reference to your degree of pigmentation, which is determined by genetics. In this way, it is sustainable to argue that race is a biological category. However, what is of crucial importance for us to acknowledge is the manner this genetic difference is analyzed. To illustrate, this new law also included what is known as the one-drop rule. It stated that even having one drop of Negro blood was enough to disqualify anyone from having the vote. This law essentially rendered blackness as a contaminant. Even a single drop of Negro blood was sufficient to render someone as unfit to vote. The implication of this law was that those not regarded as white were biologically ineligible to be part of the political process. So how was difference interpreted? On the basis of the melanin content of any given individual, an assessment could be made about their suitability to achieve full citizenry. On the basis in this way, racial hierarchy was created in the way that we understand it now. Those regarded as white were regarded as supposedly superior based on perceptions of the biological, now all of a sudden understood in racial terms. Now, as the British also colonized what is now known as the USA, and were responsible for the first enslaved Africans reaching American shores 401 years ago, this understanding of race was transplanted from the Caribbean to the United States. It is precisely this hierarchy that was used to justify slavery in the United States. But then slavery officially ended in 1863. And as it was thought that produced a race to begin with, what is then paramount for us to stay attentive to is how this kind of thinking evolved at crucial moments in the American past. And as the Emancipation Proclamation is regarded as a watershed moment in the US history, it is necessary to look at it closely. Despite its name, which suggests a sweeping gesture of unqualified freedom, as many of you probably know, the document was particular with regards to who was emancipated by this proclamation. It was only applicable in states which were in open rebellion against the Union. It specifically listed out parts of the Confederacy which were exempt precisely because they were already under Union control. It is also important to note that while the Emancipation Proclamation was declared on January 1st, 1863, there was actually a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation issued 100 days earlier on September the 22nd, 1862. This document was a threat. It was a warning. Unless you desist from rebelling against the Union, there will be consequences. We will free your enslaved population. This, in essence, was using freedom for blacks as punishment for the rebellion of whites. Put differently, the prospect of black freedom was weaponized in order to censure misbehaving whites. The Emancipation Proclamation was therefore never about black freedom or black equality. It is therefore of utmost importance for us to remain attentive to the fact that the manner in which blackness was understood did not change in any meaningful way. The evidence in this regard is simply overwhelming. The end of Reconstruction saw the introduction of Jim Crow segregationist laws, which sought to keep black people separated from those regarded as white. These laws therefore coheres with notions of blackness as contaminant. The brutal, inhumane, widespread, and almost casual manner in which lynching took place provides further damning testimony in this regard. Well, perhaps things changed with the 1964 Civil Rights Act. If you look closely at the wording of the long title of the Act, you will notice that while it outlaws discrimination based on race, it did not explicitly acknowledge the very humanity of black folk, and by extension, disavow supposed inferiority. It does not even make lynching a federal hate crime, and it still does not. Yet, in the very constitution of the country, the humanity of blackness was denied. In fact, so convinced were the founding fathers of the inferiority of black folk that they converted the supposed subservience to a mathematical accuracy, as is evidenced in the 3/5 Compromise. This very same humanity was denied during enslavement. This very same humanity was denied during Jim Crow. This very same humanity was denied when people were lynched. We now see that this very same humanity repeatedly and brutally is denied by US law enforcement officials. We must remember that the genesis of the modern police was the slave patrol. These patrols had three functions. Functions that remain embedded in present-day law enforcement. The first function was to chase down, apprehend, and return to their owners what was then termed as runaway slaves. This speaks to ideas of belonging. And where did blackness belong in America? As enslaved, as captured, as incarcerated. We see this manifest itself in our present in the prison industrial complex, where demographically disproportionate numbers of African Americans are incarcerated. If we consider the hyper-surveillance, intimidation, excessive disciplining of African American communities are subjected to, and the way that especially black men are seemingly hunted by the police, have ideas of black belonging in America then really changed? The second function of slave patrols was to provide a form of organized terror to deter slave revolts. How do we see this manifest in our present? Think about how law enforcement has responded all over the country to Black Lives Matter protests. Think about what is happening in Rochester as we speak. People are demanding that the police do what it is supposed to do, to protect and serve everyone in the same way. Yet this is basically being treated as a revolt. Demanding rights that are constitutionally guaranteed is regarded as justifying the use of tear gas, rubber bullets, police dogs, pepper spray, and routinely results in severe beatings or even worse. These attacks on civilians reflect precisely the kind of organized terror that slave patrols routinely subjected enslaved people to. The third function of these slave patrols was to maintain a form of discipline of the enslaved who were subject to summary justice outside of the law if they violated any plantation rules. This kind of vigilantism is a hallmark in terms of how minority communities experience law enforcement in the US. What happened to George Floyd was an execution. It was summary justice. You cannot kneel on someone's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and claim anything else. The haphazard way in which police fired into Breonna Taylor's apartment bears even more testimony in this regard. How is this not a form of summary justice? This plantation-like understanding of blackness as in need of constant surveillance, discipline, intimidation, and unthinkable violence persists today precisely because of how blackness is understood in the country. This understanding, first and foremost, is a problem of thought, one that has rendered especially African American men as supposedly innately criminal. This understanding of blackness therefore draws on the biological. It would seem that the presence of certain levels of melanin is interpreted as being indicative of criminality. If this is so, show me the research. I'll wait. The question then is, how do we overcome what I am going to refer to as a miseducation of difference? In a nutshell, what we need to do is to re-educate ourselves, all of us. What we need to remember is that this miseducation is the product of 400 years and is therefore almost seared into the national DNA, and thus will require a concerted and consistent effort by as many as is possible to re-educate the country. We can all be part of this re-education, first by starting with ourselves. For me, education is a lifelong process and requires repeated and consistent introspection. This is a hard process and requires, as often what we learn about ourselves does not align with who we imagine ourselves to be. However, this is the only way for us to become aware of our own individual biases. I routinely fail in this regard, and sometimes it just feels too hard, but I do my best to remind myself that I need to be the change I want to see in the world. Secondly, related to re-educating ourselves, it is imperative to listen. Listen to people when they tell you their truths. Listen to others like you want them to listen to you while you tell your truth. When we listen to others in this fashion, we recognize their humanity. We also learn exponentially more when we are not talking. As my late maternal grandmother always reminded me, Virgil, you are never the smartest person in the room, so listen far more than you speak. It is through listening that we discover how the other is experiencing the world. It is through listening that we get a sense of the challenges they face. And most importantly, it is through listening that we are able to learn how best to go about creating the world we all want to live in. Thirdly, if we want to make a real contribution to change the world, we have to remind ourselves of the truism, charity begins at home. What do I mean? We start by changing our individual worlds first. Our households, our families, our friendship circles, our workplaces. Basically, the spaces in which we operate. For each of us, this looks different, but it is becoming increasingly urgent to speak out and act whenever we encounter any kind of discrimination. And this is not just confined to race. To say or do nothing is to make ourselves complicit in the discrimination. It makes those doing the discriminating think that what they are doing is acceptable. This can be hard, intimidating work. But if we are remiss, what kind of world do we leave behind for those who follow us? We have a responsibility to ourselves and to the ones that we love to create the world we want to live in. Personally, I draw inspiration from something that Dr. Angela Davis once said. You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. This work then is a lifetime's work. To me, doing this work seems like a life worth living. Thank you. I'll just stop sharing, and then I'm going to pass on to Ms. Gaynelle. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Is that me?
That would be you.
And my video can just show me. Mine's going to be short and sweet and to the point. Ready?
We are ready.
If you are born and raised and white in the United States of America, you are racist. Think about that and how it made you feel. You were trained to be a racist through the media and other systems that we have to deal with. Let me divert for a minute and thank the other two young students before me. You were intellectual, you were absolutely wonderful, and you articulated the issues around race in America. If, again, I'll say it again, if you are born and raised white in the United States of America, you are trained to be racist. What these young people spoke about, I lived. That's why you don't have maybe a PowerPoint presentation. We are stamped by birth. Black people, not people of color. I do not use that term. Black people are stamped by birth. What do I mean? Your birth certificate. My birth certificate is stored in my safe deposit box as a reminder that I'm a Negro and I'm colored. That's where the sin is. And that's why they wanted Barack Obama's birth certificate, to insult, demean, and hurt, and to send a message to white America that he's not one of you, no matter whether his grandmother was white or not. Again, stamped by birth. I think there's already a book. These two young, intelligent young men can tell you the name of the author. You can look it up. You're at the library. The other thing that's important, how we are stamped, is through our Social Security number. Why do we give prisoners numbers? So they can identify who they are and where they are, where they come from. Our Social Security numbers identified us by who we are, where we come from. I was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, through the height of segregation. We had only toilets to go to that were colored. Our water fountains said colored. Our schools were colored. And there was a height of segregation. When I got on the bus at 6 years old to go to school, I was given a sign that said colored. And I had to sit behind a colored sign. And nobody helped us. Do you hear what I said? No one. They were complicit in the sin of racism. That is what sin looks like. Our schools were segregated. I went to an all-Black Catholic school taught by all Black women who are all sisters of the Holy Family, and my chemistry teacher is still alive. She remembered all of my experiments. I took a group of teachers to New Orleans to visit them to show what an excellent school looks like. The reason we don't have excellent schools here is because the white people have stolen the money from our poor communities and they've given it all to the suburbs. So stop blaming the parents, stop blaming the teachers, and stop blaming them. They stole the money. They're the only group of people who do not vote on a budget. Why is that? We need to ask the question, why do I have to teach you these things when it's right before your eyes? You can see it. I think in the gospel or one of those religious pieces, it says the blind can't see. You're blind. Blind. How come you can't see? How come you can't see a man didn't have clothes on? How come you can't see that? How come you can't see children don't have a pencil or the right equipment for their schools? How come you can't see it? Those are the things that make me angry because I grew up in segregation and I was not poor. In New Orleans, Louisiana, Pontchartrain Park was the only to keep the Blacks happy in the United States, and I could be wrong, but you can correct me. That's the only Black middle class section that was designated in the United States of America, people. I said the United States, and we want to go back? No. People were killing us then, spitting in my food, carrying on, and you want me to live that way? Absolutely not. America was great by that. It was not great. It was sinful and evil. And people were evil. White people were evil to Black people at that time. How do you do that to other people and live a life? How do you do that to people's children? They gave a beautiful intellectual discussion. It was not intellectual, folks. It was evil. The bishops of the United States wrote a letter called Brothers and Sisters to Us, saying that racism was evil. You didn't see the evilness in people's eyes when you got on a bus or walked someplace. You didn't see the evilness when you couldn't go into the store. You didn't see the evilness. We couldn't shop in certain places. You couldn't see the evilness. So all of those intellectual words and all those words were in history, they were evil. It's wrong. And that's the problem. There are laws, and they keep making them, but you can't notice them because we're blind. They keep changing the rules. You're blind. And they keep evolving. You're blind. How do you have certain sections in this, even in just in Rochester, just delegated for or relegated for whites or relegated for blacks, or the Jews live in Brighton? How do you do that? The housing segregation. How do you do that? And allow it to go on and don't complain. That's evil. That's what sin looks like. I have to wait for you to read a book to change. There are books out there that explain all of these things. That's important for you to know. I think that we need to be able to ask more questions. Why don't you have a regional school district where everybody participates and everybody can get the money and the resources? Why do you have to continue to have a segregated school system? Why don't we have buses for everybody, not just for certain people, or people have to wait hours to get a bus to go work from the city to the suburbs? That's evil. That's what it is. Interracial marriages, there were laws against that. Because do you know why there were laws against it? Because the issues around abortion and all those issues to make sure that there were enough white babies born and a white population grows. That's the challenge. They don't want integration. They don't want interracial marriages. Because when they do, guess what? Brown dominates. There's no more white, pure white. And that's what is wanted. That's what all is going on in the United States of America. What kind of foolishness is that when you're dealing with human beings? How come we don't talk about justice? Those are the things that I think we need to be talking about. I think that Virgil mentioned, I want to mention something he said because it stuck with me, about the glass ceiling. Our ceiling is brick. Black women's ceilings are brick. It's not glass. The transfer of power in the United States of America goes from white men to their children who are white, whether they're daughters or sons, but it will not go to relatives that look like me. That's the challenge. Go look who runs the corporations. Come on now. Those are the things we need to notice. And if you don't notice those things, then how are you going to help me? I don't want to go sit in the front of the bus. I want to own the bus. You know, think about it. They're gone. You know, oh, we want you to participate. I don't want to participate. Maybe somebody wants to be in charge. Think about those things for a minute. Those are critical issues. How do you know the child or the person that we are not promoting has the cure for cancer? How do we know that the things that we're dealing with, how do we know they don't have the answers to that? Those things are challenging to us. So you would rather die from a disease rather than have someone who don't look like you find a cure? Does that make any sense to you? Think about that. That's what we're doing. We're killing ourselves. We're not growing. We keep stopping. Oh, let's do this. How many more years? I'm ready to leave this earth at some point, and I got to wait for people to read a book to help me? How do you know how to help me? Did you ask me? Those are the challenges we need to face in terms of families and children. I don't use people of color because it's uncomfortable for our media to say black. Think about it. All of us are black. Whether you are Creole, whether you are, black, Chinese, whatever, in terms of the people that we talk, Caribbean, all the people who come from the different countries who are dark skinned, they don't call them white, they call them black. Or ask, what are you? Really? Think about those things. we are in big trouble because we won't open our eyes to see what's around us. Yes, I'm angry. I'm going to still be angry. I'm going to probably leave here angry. But the issue is, these young people have given you the intellectual journey, information on how to learn about these things. But you know what? The law is written on our hearts. People before didn't need a book to know how to treat another person, or when somebody was hungry, give them food to eat. That's not in a book. That's in our hearts. Do we have hearts anymore? No. Watching them scream on television. Let's go back. Back to what and where? Our cemeteries are even segregated, folks. Think about it. Go look around the lives we're leading and just look at the things that are around us and ask, are we changing any of those things? Are we really? Are we impacting the people we coming in contact with in terms of whether it's the cemetery or when they're building something? Are we asking questions? Are we asking questions of our politicians that you're trying to elect? Why in the world would Rochester need a tank and nobody asked the question of why we're getting the tank? Why? Some people, but they probably didn't even know we had one. Why? Why do you need police armed? To do what? To kill whom? Most of the people who are poor don't even have a gun. They might have one now, but really think about it. Think about it. Think about what we're doing to ourselves and how we're hurting our children and the future. What future are we going to have when we got tanks and rubber bullets to shoot the very ordinary citizens we have here? What's the purpose? I just point out a couple of things just in terms of growing up. Segregation was not that wonderful, and it lasted a long time. Segregating our schools was not that great. What it did do, though, it did empower the Black communities, and we have a lot of Black professionals today because of that. And I think those are the things that are important to me in terms of the advancement. But think how much further we could be advanced if we work together side by side and share information instead of saying, well, Virgil, you have that information, but I'm not going to give you mine. Think about it. Think about how much better we all will be. We're not. We're worse. The world is looking at us, and we're worse now than ever because of race. Race, the hatred of Black people, the hatred. And the world is watching how we treat Black people. How do you recover from that? How do you do that? What are we going to do? And that's the challenge. I thought about all these things, but it's just too passionate to think about all these things in terms of living on this earth under segregation. That's a long time. To have people spit in your food or tell you your existence isn't normal. How do you get over that? How do we get that over to the children? Just think about the children in the city. It's not normal. It's not. How we living? It's not normal. It's not just, and it's not right. Justice is going to be paid in the end. You may not like how it is given back to this community. I'll say it enough. Ask me questions. Thank you. Oh, I gotta pass. I cannot know how to pass it on. Sorry. You young folks are better than I.
Thank you. That's my aunt, y'all, and I am so proud of her. And that is the tradition that I hope to carry on in the work that I do. So thank you so much for speaking with so much passion, because this is not an intellectual exercise, right? We're living and breathing it, and this is real. And I think that's why it's so important that you were asked to be here today, because you've lived through it, you've experienced it, and people need to actually see, what that is. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'll say that publicly every day, all day. I don't care where I'm at.
You're so kind. Well, I have to tell you, those two young men inspired me because they were really excellent. And then you have to have someone who's kind of lived it to put the flesh on the bone to say, guys, we could end up like this again.
Thank you so much. So, Mr. Hussain, it's your turn, and you're gonna lead us on home. So, we've got about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Letitia. Wow, look at this. I mean, 51 people is 8 o'clock. You're showing up. I appreciate that. Dr. Covington, I so am grateful that this was recorded so I can learn from you. And I have to say, Ms. Wethers, my mom has the same dish cabinet. So this whole time, I'm like smelling like Pakistani food in my mind, because all I'm seeing is my mom's cooking because the kitchen's right next to the cabinet. So thank you for that. I needed that tonight. I wanted to talk about my work on race and education, and in so many ways it intersects not from a lived experience, but from the experience of a historian with what Ms. Wethers has shared. But then I just had some things happen in the last 48 hours, and I had to put that away. Somebody that I really respect and appreciate had said something to me really interesting about a certain now widely known figure who had done something that really put a lot of Black and brown people in danger. And a lot of people called this public figure out. And this person that I respected was like, oh, look at this poor guy. Everybody's going after him, trying to cancel him. This is all that cancel culture. And I was like, that's so interesting. Cancel culture, right? So I needed to sort of sit with that and sit with what is cancel culture, right? And it reminded me of another word that I heard growing up a lot, politically correct, right? Or politically incorrect, right? And a word that gets thrown around a lot these days, snowflakes. Right, so all of these words to me are connected to this moment where somebody had made these violent threats that somebody could have acted on, and people calling him out was called cancel culture. And so I went and looked up in some papers what these words mean, right? PC culture, right? Politically correct, right? And I looked up that it is, according to NPR, right, describes language, policies, or measures that are not intended to avoid offense. Right, so offense, right? Then I looked up cancel culture. Cancel culture, promoting the canceling of people or brands or even shows or movies due to some offense or problematic remarks. And snowflakes, of course, snowflakes are people that are easily offended, right? So I thought this is what I wanna just kind of explore with us. And instead of bringing in my work, I'm gonna bring in myself. Right, because my whole life I have known that words have things under them, and yet now I'm being told that they're just words, and if you're offended by them, that's what free speech is about, And we can try to be polite and encourage people not to use those words, right? That's what that's about. If people want to say, right, if they want to say anchor babies, that's just offensive speech. This is America. Right? If people want to talk about radicalized Muslims, BLM terrorists, right? That's just America. That's freedom of speech. If you have a problem, you can counter that. And I'm sure that that's an interesting debate, but not the one I want to have. I want to look at those words like the tip of an iceberg. And I want to use my own story to help us unpack the relationship, especially in a political year, with the kinds of words that are being called politically incorrect or that are deemed offensive, right? That the problem with them is offensive. And so I'm going to give you the punchline right now, and you can go ahead and laugh, right? I'm going to say it's not about offense or correctness. it's about genocide. I know. Okay, so let's go. All right, I'm gonna take you back. I'm 7 years old, and I walk into my first grade classroom, and that's a big thing for me because my son is just started first grade on Zoom, granted. But I walk in, and there is a cupcake and an American flag on my desk, right? And it was the teacher, I'm sure, had put it there because my parents had just become American citizens. And, you know, I remember me and Joey Calhoun, we kind of stood at the playground, the local paper, the Thousand Island Sun, took our picture. We were on the front. It was like a little special story, right? And I remember that cupcake because I didn't get cupcakes because I'm January 3rd. And January 3rd kids don't get birthday cupcakes, right? So you're on winter break. So it's the first cupcake I ever got in school, last cupcake I ever got in school. And, you know, in so many ways, that was supposed to be the context, right? This is America, right? That's what we're about. Everybody belongs here, right? So don't worry about the people that call you a camel jockey or a sand digger or a terrorist, right? That on your way to school. Don't worry about what happens there, right? That's just the ugliness, that's bigotry, right? But what if it's not? What if what's underneath that is something more? What if what is underneath that is actually the story of these words, right? Because when I look at my life in the last few years, the political rhetoric is ratcheted up. You know, the Muslim ban, and again, this discourse about, you know, you got to keep America safe, right, from this threat, right? But this is an older story than the current administration, right? This is just the newest wave of race-based anti-immigration policies and rhetoric. And we see it play out in every kind of dimension of life, right? You know, I have, like many of you, right, experienced that everyday kind of bigotry, right? I remember Rochester, New York, you know, going to buy a house, had my wife and my little kid with me. And, you know, I'm a pretty friendly person, Virgil can attest. And I, you know, just said hi to the neighbor, and the neighbor said, first words out of his mouth, "Are you a terrorist?" Right? That's that interpersonal sting. That's that bigotry that we say is unfortunate, that can be educated out of people, right? But we see that ratcheted up, right? Like my wife's cousin, whose friends, newlyweds, in their early 20s, along with the bride's younger sister, who had just gotten into dental school, right, in North Carolina, were murdered by their neighbor, executed in their home by a man who told the police he hated the way they looked. And that's one of 700 reports of hate crimes against people that looked Muslim, Arab, Pakistani, South Asian that year. Right? And that number rises, according to the FBI. But that's, you know, that's that interpersonal problem, right? We have bigoted people, we have bad apples, right? Except that I grew up in the post 9/11 world, where we saw the emergence of religious surveillance programs, Muslim mapping programs, right? We see the research from the Center for Constitutional Rights, right? That demonstrates that thousands of Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, South Asians were rounded up, right? I remember Syracuse, New York, right down the road. Every single Arab and Muslim family was visited by the FBI. Every one of them was asked if they had a Quran at home and how often they went to the mosque, right? That's government funded, right? Now, is that bigotry, right? When I lived in New York after 9/11, I saw ICE disappear entire Pakistani communities, places that were vibrant with little mosques and shops, just erased, people gone. And I saw the way that other poor people of color hunted and exploited those immigrants because they knew that they were too afraid of the police, and they would rather have someone come in and rob them than they would actually call authorities, because authorities were the enemy too. And it's not even that I can leave that world and go into my home, right? Georgetown University published a paper, 2.6 million news stories covering Muslims and Islam in the last 10 years. And almost all of them perpetuate an image of a villain or a victim, There's no Muslim firefighters, school teachers, parents, right? Educators, writers, thinkers, right? So imagine 2.6 million touch points every time you pick up your phone, every time you look at a computer. You are the beast that you are seeing in the reflection of your phone. So what does this do? What does this do to a person? You know, Joseph Hovey and Mona Amer, they talk about how anxiety and depression rates among Muslim Americans and Arab Americans in 35 states is among the highest of any minority group, right? They display levels of depression and anxiety at disproportionate rates. And anyone on this call, have you known someone that lived with deep and sustained depression? Did that ripple out to the rest of the family? Did it ripple out to you, right? We know the psychological devastation that that can have, not just on the person, right? So why am I bringing all this up? I was talking about words a minute ago. You know, if it was one thing, right? It's that bully on the playground. Stand up for yourself, right? It's that inappropriate surveillance. Get a lawyer, right? It's media misrepresenting you. Get your own media. Create your own Instagram account. Get out there. Be a culture creator, right? You can do something if it's one thing, right? But I want to think alongside Marilyn Fry, the philosopher, who says, you can say that to somebody. You can say, here's your barrier, go around it. Except what if they turn and there's another barrier, and they turn and there's another barrier, and they turn and there's another barrier. Zoom back, what do you see? You see a cage. That is what is underneath those words. That is what those words are a part of. I don't just hear offensive words. I know that that line of thinking is a wire in an interconnected web. That will be reinforced by people with weapons. That will be reinforced by people with weapons. That will be reinforced by people that have knowledge of systems and participate in those systems. Ms. Wethers told us, you are racist whether you want to be or not. To me, that's what we're talking about, is those that can perpetuate those systems without knowledge or even intent at times. And why am I telling you the grim reality of that story, of my own life, right? Is not, again, to kind of bring us down, but to bring us in, right? One of the best definitions I've ever heard of compassion is to sit with somebody's pain, to bear witness to their truth. And when I tell you that truth of the cage, I'm also trying to signal another truth, right? About, you know, that young man who is in high school, and he walks by the honors room, and this young black man tries to walk in the honors room, and he's told, this is for honor students only. All he sees is a room full of white faces. And that same young man walks down the hall back to his classroom, and the teacher, a female white teacher, crosses the hall and says, you know, nothing. And the young man says, why'd you cross the hall? And she said, because I'm afraid of you. That same young man walking home from school is pulled over by a city police officer and accused of shoplifting. That same young man grows up to become an activist, just to have newspapers say, watch out for him, he's a threat, even though he's being of service to his community. He lives in that cage, and they're going to call him a Black Lives Matter terrorist. Right? So is that an offensive word, or is that a signal? Because I saw in my city, when our city leaders said, you know, there's protests going on, please stay at home. We saw people with shotguns come out to protect themselves from these young people that were trying to find a way to participate in that flag and in that cupcake, in that promise. And that promise that I was told when I was 7 years old existed. So what do we have to do other than bear witness to the fact that underneath these words, underneath these empty claims that these are just snowflakes, right? We have to recognize that this is bigger than bigotry. It's bigger than political correctness or cancel culture. It's not about offense, it's about extinction. And if we really do care about community, we have to move our political imagination to ask what is underneath. We have to ask, to quote Professor Slade, we need a re-education about difference. We need to ask, in our community, in my community, right now, whose life is at stake? Who in my community is living a life in a cage where every word has underneath it a built-in army that could be deployed in 1,000 different ways, from a cut to a slight to a bullet. And until we can care at that level of awareness about who in my community's life is at stake, we cannot say that we really believe that anyone's life matters. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. Again, we often forget our Muslim brothers and sisters in this dialogue. This is why intersectionality is so important. So thank you so much for highlighting, so very, very well, and how similar you and my aunt's stories are in many ways, right? And I think about my own life and how similar it is to y'all's, right? I still live in segregation as a disabled Black woman. I have seen people disappeared, right? Because folks said that they weren't capable. They go into an institution and then you don't hear from them again, right? So understanding how this is real life, real lives, people who are loved, right? People who are good cooks. Pakistani food is my favorite. And so, yes. So, like good cooks and that smell of home, right? That a simple cabinet can bring you back to, memories, etc. That's what this is all about. I know yesterday we talked about the body is political, right? And we're kind of touching again on that today, and that politics and race really can be conflated with each other, right? And that can be used as weapons against human beings. And how do you get to that caring? So I want to thank you, every single one of you, for this wonderful, wonderful panel. So give yourself some applause. I don't know. Yay. So we have some time for some questions. There's more comments today than questions. So I'm going to get to one of the questions and kind of open it up because it seems like an open-ended question. Thank you for this conversation and for the historical information and commentary. History can teach us and inform us. As several of the panelists offered, facing our history is facing our racism. We are obviously at a point in time, once again, where we have some choices to make and to undertake actions that can move us toward a solution or solutions. I agree with Virgil and Sim that the step in that direction is education and listening. Is there something we can learn from other countries, from how they may have addressed racism, that we can offer us some next steps so we can move forward? And as a white person in a predominantly white community who wants to help combat racism, what can we do? Where can we start?
I'm just going to jump in really quick because I think that even when it comes to the idea of like a liberal multicultural democracy, we come out fairly empty. And not to get too political here, but I think it's very interesting when somebody like Bernie Sanders is considered a radical when he's just basically a Democrat from the 70s. And I think we live in a world that has so lost whatever the center was even a generation ago, that this example is a pretty mediocre example. And not one that they should celebrate. But I had an opportunity some years ago to spend some time in New Zealand, and I was struck by a couple things that they did as a society. One is that they apologized for colonialism, and they followed that apology with 2 or 3 kind of policy transformations or changes. I don't know if transformation is the word. They gave back power to control the curriculum to Maori and Pacifica communities, and that reshaped the entire country's knowledge base, right? Like you go to a rugby game, everybody can do the national anthem, right, in Maori, right? And so that gave everyone a sense of, at least even at a general sense of just, oh, there are different cultures here that have whole bodies of meaning. They gave there's a required number of seats in Parliament that have to be representative of Maori. All public lands, every board that reviews contracts for public lands has to include representation from Maori leaders. So there's, again, I'm not saying it's great, but I'm saying it was the only example that I've really seen of a country where they apologized and then there was something behind the apology.
Auntie, you're muted. You've got to unmute. There you go.
Okay, sorry. It's intentional to include others. We did that at a white Catholic church. What we did was to make sure that we had more minorities on a parish council than majorities. The things when we set up committees, we made sure and was intentional to include others that were not look like the dominant group. We have to somehow start someplace, and not to start or to continue on isn't working. And I think that it may not be perfect, but it shows some intention to be inclusive and include others. And we need to do that with all the committees, whether it's in a school committee, making sure people are included. With who's not here, what group is not here, we need to hear their voice. If they're not here and can't be on this committee, how do we ensure hearing that voice? And we don't do that here in the United States. We have to do that. So I like that, at least a beginning for the example. We need to do something like that and more of it.
This is Dr. Covington. I wholeheartedly agree. I'm going to share an interesting fact. So here's the interesting fact. Every year since I was born, people testify to seeing UFOs, the Loch Ness Monster, and Bigfoot, but they fail to see racism, sexism, homophobia, and political discrimination. I don't even know how that's possible.
I know.
So I'm going to categorize that as willful ignorance. So I have a variety of things that I think that people can do when it comes to addressing this. And I'm going to start with education. When it comes to education, things that can happen within the educational system is to tell the real history of this country. We're talking about violence now, but this country started with violence. So that includes colonization, slavery, Jim Crow laws, racial segregation. Right here in Rochester, we had the '64 riots. In addition to that, when it comes to law enforcement, a lot of times if a person of color is taken down in an unjust way, here's a wonderful opportunity for people who are working in history. How many times has the change of venue been recommended to support someone from a marginalized background? How many times in the change of venue cases was the judge a person of color? Why is a change of venue even necessary if there is no bias in this country? Right? A perfect example of that was Rodney King was assaulted in LA County. They moved the change of venue. A perfect example of that was Amadou Diallo from the Bronx shot at 41 times. They moved the change of venue. Right? If we don't have bias, then what's the purpose of moving the change of venue when it comes to the judicial process? So that's my recommendation for that. When it comes to police academies and police departments, they should regularly review or change or establish care policies about tactical enforcement with civilians. I think that's very important. Police departments need to create direct policies and procedures in regards to how an officer should intervene if they witness or is a bystander to another officer using excessive force. What's taking place here, right? In addition to that, if you are employed, when it comes to the national climate, what is your organization doing around corporate social responsibility? Are they taking a stance in regards to social injustice that's taking place in your community or on the national climate? In regards to community members, what can you do on an individual basis? A lack of understanding or different views should not always open the door to a lack of civility. Just because we disagree doesn't necessarily mean that you need to engage in disrespect. Recognize the difference between peaceful protests and crimes of opportunity. Stand up to injustice when you see it. Say something. Stop playing the sideline, right? Be intrinsically motivated. This goes back to intentionality. Be intrinsically motivated to introduce yourself and your children to positive models from diverse backgrounds, because a lot of the stuff that they're getting in the media is not favorable. Stop dismissing the experience of other people and collaborate for understanding. Whose voice is missing? I wholeheartedly agree with that. So I just want to share some very quickly, be the change you want to see in the world. So I just wanted to share some quick points. Once again, feel free to steal it. Every year, people testify to seeing UFOs, the Loch Ness Monster, and Bigfoot, but they fail to see racism, sexism, homophobia, political discrimination, etc. So willful ignorance at its best. Lutisha, I give it back to you.
Yeah.
And I want, we just got to like have a moment and laugh at that one. You know, I think it also started when, you know, colonizers first came here. We discovered a place that already has people in it. So I think it starts from the very beginning. Virgil, I want to have your opinion into this as well.
Absolutely. You know, I was listening to everybody, and I don't know that I can add much to this, except to say that, you know, like two things occurred to me. You know, we so kind of almost trained to focus on difference, and when we focus on difference, you know, what we lose is we lose, you know, a recognition of commonalities. You know, irrespective of what community you go into, you know, and America is a very diverse space. You know, we basically want the same things, right? We want to look after our families. We want to be comfortable. We want all of these kind of things, and so in that way, you know, by just starting off there and recognizing that, you know what, at our very foundation, we are the same, right? If that is the point of departure, we're already doing better than we've ever done before. And then also, as a second point, I want to speak about, you know, what COVID has taught us. You know, during COVID, a lot of people weren't able to go to work. Those that were able to go to work, they were regarded as essential workers. Now, in terms of essential workers, yeah, I don't want to speak about, you know, medical professionals, and I don't want to speak about emergency services people, of course, and I want to thank them for you know, putting themselves in harm's way in the way that they have. But I want to speak about the kind of people that do the more menial kinds of labor, you know, the people that come and collect our garbage, you know, the people that pack that pack the shelves in the grocery stores that we go to. You know, generally speaking, these are the people that are also invisible in this capitalist culture that we live in. You know, generally speaking, people don't recognize them, they don't acknowledge them. You know, they are invisible. And what COVID has taught us is that this society cannot survive unless we all, you know, unless everybody does what they are supposed to do. And so in that way, we absolutely share an indebtedness to each other. And it's important that we recognize that indebtedness, because as soon, you know, I want to challenge people, when you go to your grocery store and you see somebody packing a shelf, say thank you. They put themselves in harm's way during COVID, right? Why do you think it is? When we think about people that do that kind of menial labor, and, you know, Dr. Covington and Dr. Price last night, they did a great job with kind of explaining, you know, how COVID has adversely and disproportionately affected minority populations. This is not coincidental. These happen to be the communities that, for the most part, do these kind of jobs. And so, in other words, they were put in harm's way, and they did it for all of us, you know. And so what I basically want to say is that, you know, if we're thinking about just, you know, small things, and, you know, recognizing recognizing everybody as equally human to ourselves, right? As soon as we do that, we recognize our indebtedness to each other. And when you feel indebted to someone, you're far less likely to, perpetrate any kind of violence, say any kind of violent thing. Say thank you and be on your way.
Amen. Virgil, I have to tell you this. The garbage man came today, and they were outside, and all of a sudden from around the truck, a black woman was a garbage lady. I said, "Oh, we got a black garbage lady. Thank you, thank you." She fell out laughing. And my husband said, "Gaynelle, you crazy." I said, "Well, she's out there in the street. We might as well acknowledge her in the neighborhood."
Right.
We forget to do that. She had a big smile on her, and so did her partner. I have to say thank you. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to contact the waste management group and let them know how I feel about it. That's the kind of things we need to be doing all the time. Just say, not just thank you to them. I thank the whole neighborhood, and I'll call them and say thank you. And it goes a long way. So thank you for mentioning that. Yeah.
That is awesome. Yeah, we often forget about, those who are on the front lines, scared, right? And they don't have the choice to socially distance or quarantine, right? And all the different ways. And before that, we wouldn't want to give them $15 an hour. Now they essential, without the essential pay. So
Right. I also have to say to you, I tip my postman to say thank you for bringing the mail. So those are the kinds of things we forget to do, and just a card or something to say thank you. So thank you, Virgil, for reminding us.
awesome. So I want to read this comment because I do think it's important. On 9/11, my Syrian father called to tell me to change my last name. He was worried about my safety. It was the only time I disobeyed my beloved Baba.
I think that internalized oppression is something that we both have to be kind and vigilant about. How can you be a person with a brain and nerves and basic observational skills and not come out having some self-hate? And I remember the first time I got on an airplane after 9/11, and I remember seeing a Muslim man with a turban and just traditional Islamic clothing. And my first reaction was fear, all internal, and not fear for him, fear from him. And it was a shock to me. It was a shock because these are, my grandfather looked like that. And my grandfather was a revered person in our family. And I had been so bombarded with these images again and again and again to the point where my sort of implicit, unconscious, my nerves are right there, right? So how can I trust anyone? I can't even trust myself with how deeply my miseducation has been filtered in. So I think one is being compassionate, when we find ourselves in moments of self-hate, when we find ourselves in moments where we are participating in the logic of our destruction, and a vigilance to know and suspect that it's there, right? That we can catch it, right? We can catch it like a cat looking for a mouse in a barn. We can find it, but we have to be like a cat looking for a mouse in a barn. We've got to be watchful of the ways in which white supremacy operate in our own internalized logic. Because until we create and recreate the world anew, right, this is the world that we were given. And so I just want to applaud the person that very lovingly pushed back on their Baba, even though that was probably a hard conversation, but a conversation that ultimately was an honor to their Baba, right? I mean, that's at the end of the day, you are for yourself and for them doing that work of reclamation, that I will at least not fall back from the sense of self I already have. You can't have that land. That is land that you cannot colonize, the land inside of me.
Maybe I'm a good person to kind of speak here as well. I can say this honestly, it was not great growing up with the name Virgil. I love the name now. I absolutely love it now. But when I was young, I was really mad at my mom and my dad, and especially my mom, because she agreed to it. And I was like, Mom, how, John, Matthew, like, I don't care, Sam, just why Virgil, right? And I promised myself when I was a very young person that as soon as I could, I would change my name. But, kind of going through all of the hardship that was associated with the way in which, I was teased about my name, that became so important to, developing, as a person I'm still developing as a person. But, to change my name would have felt for me anyway, like I was losing that history, that I was losing a part of myself. And so when we talk about people's names, we are talking about their histories, we're talking about their very identities. And so I think it's really important just to think about, how privilege operates in this particular instance, because here's the thing. I'm talking about my own privilege here. I wanted to change my name just because, people used to tease me about it. Here we're talking about somebody who wanted to, who was asked by their parents to change their last name, basically losing their family history because they were afraid of, their child's safety, right? And so here, what we absolutely then get a sense of is like how different people from different communities in the space of America, the kind of angst that they go through, angst that most of us don't understand. I do not understand. Like, I know if somebody sees my name, I'm not going to be targeted for anything. I don't read Muslim. I don't read Jewish, right? Virgil Slade sounds like a very English name. Of course, when they see me, they're like, okay, that doesn't quite make sense, but that's another story for another day. But I just wanted to point out, that when one does have the kind of privilege like the kind that we're kind of talking about here, what this can do is obfuscate, it can blind you from the realities that people are facing every day. And, it's really important for us to recognize that, that we need to be more sensitive to what the realities are of all different communities within the space of the United States.
Love it.
That's powerful. Yeah, names are so important. I love my name. I've loved that name since I was a kid, but I too got teased. It's too long. It never fit on like the line, on any of the homeworks. Letitia Andre Doucette, like it never fit. People mispronounce my name all the time. I was told by someone that, oh, your mother spelled your name wrong. And if I were to have been your mother, I would have spelled it Letitia. And I was like, well, that's a different name altogether. So, like, no. And, to honor the woman who was, her mother, that's why I was named after her. And that carries something, right? And that a name is something more in some families, right? That it's a collective act in some of my friends' circles, like, to name the child, and you kind of wait for the personality, or there's, a numbers game that you have to do, and astrological signs. I think it's great, right? But that has power. And when you think that changing your name can protect you from the racism, right? That's the only thing I can do as a father. Change your name. I can't protect you, but, erase me from you, right? And that is my way of protecting you. I think is something powerful in how that parent was feeling for their child. And so, and to say no, sometimes it's so hard to say no to our parents. So what a struggle and what a testimony. I want to thank everyone for sharing.
In regards to an individual name, I think a name is very much so embedded in somebody's identity. And I think it's very important to note the father's perceived threat in this country, where he's making a recommendation that his child change their last name. That is profound. That's deep, right? And in addition to that, as we're talking about the political landscape and things that people have to deal with in this country, it's very important for me to bring up employment, right? Does your name pass the quote unquote resume test?
That's right.
It's crucial. That is crucial. Even if you have equivalent or superior credentials, by default of your name, bias plays a major role. My full name is Sim Jonathan Covington Jr., right? So my parents are from South Carolina. and relocated to New York. So just by default of my name is going to pass the resume test. But would I have the same reception if my name was perceived as more ethnic, regardless of my credentials? How am I going to be perceived? If I'm also processing this whole concept of acceptable dress, which I brought up earlier, especially when it comes to the political landscape. If Kamala decides to have one of her speech, and I just gave an example, if she had cornrows in her hair, what's going to happen in that case? So I think a lot of times people are willing to acclimate, but the country or the history of this country expects you to assimilate, which is very different, right? And I think it's very important to have those conversations. I'm all set.
You guys are deep tonight. Let me just say this to you. This is excellent. Well, because in my younger day, I always taught all my classrooms. I always ask the students, what's the meaning of your name? You will be surprised that the students didn't always know who they were named after and what their names meant. And I'll promote my little Catholic religion, even though it's not always that great. We had confirmation names. So we had the opportunity to choose which saint we wanted to name after and be a role model for. And that's what I try to help people understand. I did a whole workshop on names, ethnic names, and how to look at their resumes and why people weren't being hired because their names were Shamika and this and that, and I'm like, what are you doing, people? So just helping students understand, you don't have to change your name, maybe use an initial, but you've got to do something if you're, depending on what job you're beginning to look for. People aren't selecting these young people with ethnic names. That's the challenge we face. How you dress is critical. I'm already saying what you already know. I just have had students talk to me about it and see the results of it. So these are all issues that deal with race, culture, and racism within our community. So I applaud all of you. Thank you so much for, the Holy Spirit is working, so to speak, and making sure we are letting everybody know these issues that are plaguing our young people. So thank you.
Thank you for that. I know what my name means.
Jeez. Are you gonna tell them? Okay.
Good. The first name actually goes back to when Paris was a tiny, muddy little city, the Seine River in the area that France was then Gaul, right? So it was called Lutèce, and it literally means muddy city, but it is number 71 on the periodic table.
Oh.
So, that's also my nickname is 71.
Okay, that's good to know. I didn't know that one.
Andre means strong, and Doucette means gentle. I don't like mud. I think I'm strong, and I am not a gentle person. So, there you go, right? But I think it's always interesting to see, the family history of names. Our last question of the night is, do you think more violence is inevitable in this country as the country becomes less white? Or are you more hopeful that we can build on discussions like this one to move us forward in a peaceful way?
I have a very raw and real response to that. So here's my raw and real response to that. In regards to more violence being inevitable, I think as people continue to feel dismissed, they're going to respond based on their lived experience. While other people are seeing violence in this country, some people's perception is if every time injustice takes place, it comes at a significant cost, then maybe the injustice will stop, right? So once again, people see life through the lens of their experience. The second part, are you more hopeful that we can build on discussions like this one? That is definitely my hope. I think that discussions like this definitely need to take place. I think that, once again, something that I mentioned earlier is that even in the face of divergent views, we still want to make sure that we have a foundation of civility. And when that civility gets lost, that's when we have chaos ensues. So
I shouldn't follow you, Dr. Covington, but I want to just say that, you know, I have hope in conversations like this, especially when we have the opportunity to tie them into, you know, specific policy matters. Because, you know, I think in our own ways, we've all talked about how policy has intersected with our identities. And how we've been shaped by policies from segregation to profiling to you know, just even job discrimination. There's a way in which I think that actually connects to the question of violence, and that is that it's an old folk song. It takes a lot of love. It takes a lot of love, and it takes a lot of organizing and a lot of collective action and work to get to a point where you don't have to use violence to create humanizing change. And so, you know, I think that for movements of justice to be effective, they also have to cut across difference. And so I think a challenge, you know, you look at the, you know, Bob Moses and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and, you know, of course, the great John Lewis. They didn't say, okay, let's go get some white folks and let's have a conversation about difference. They said, let's go south and get people to vote. Oh wait, we should probably have some white folks go with us. And now it's like, but how do white folks and black folks work together? Right? We don't really understand each other. We don't really have a common ground. We grew up segregated and different. Now let's have a conversation about difference. So the dialogue proceeds the policy issue. So I would say that these conversations are more honest if we can identify, you know, whether it's gerrymandering or school segregation through districting and suburbanization, or police reform. Like, let's pick the issue, right? And then let's talk about, why do we care about this issue? What are the things that we're missing in terms of our line of understanding, right? And so that we're more effective at organizing coalition, because we have more intercultural literacy, more empathy, more perspective, and then we understand instinctively why we need to actually follow the leadership of Black and brown people, specifically Black women. I think we need to trust Black women, because they keep leading us to places like Me Too and Black Lives Matter. And, you know, I think that the humanizing frontier for this country lays in their hands.
Virgil, you're going to speak up before me? Oh.
Would you like me to go first, Mrs. Wethers?
Oh, absolutely. Age before beauty. Huh? No.
Absolutely. You know, this is a tough question. So, I mean, obviously I want to speak from my perspective. So this is the reality, you know, in terms of how I try to comport myself in life, is that I give everybody the benefit of the doubt until such time that they give me reason not to. You know, I talk a lot about my grandmother. You know, my grandmother always told me, trust your eyes and your ears. You know, if somebody gives you a reason not to believe in them anymore, don't believe in them anymore. You know, all of that to say that, you know, I've experienced where people will meet me and they think they know me already. And so, you know, I try to embody something different, where I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt until such time that you give me reason not to. So when we're talking about, you know, is violence inevitable? I think that most of us understand, probably everybody on this call understands, that, you know what, this next couple of months, what is at stake is not only, you know, police accountability boards in, you know, in upstate New York. What is at stake here is the actual soul, you know, of not only in upstate New York, you know, but the country as a whole. And, you know, precisely because I believe that people are innately good, first and foremost, I'd like to believe that people are going to say that, listen, this is my Geneva. It's not going to be the Geneva that you're trying to create. This is my America. I'm not going to stand by and let you make it an America where I have to sit and watch, you know, at the beginning of my summer, somebody kneeling on somebody's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and they don't even get charged. I think that people in their heart of hearts know what is right. And, if we're going to avoid that kind of, a capitulation or intensification of the violence that we already see, it's when good people turn away, you know. There was this, I want to leave you with this. There was this German cleric, Martin Niemöller, in 1941. So he was a German cleric, and, so he was in Germany, during the time of the Nazis, and he has this famous quotation. He says, first they came for the trade unionists, and I was not a trade unionist, so I said nothing. He said, next they came for the socialists. I was not a socialist, so I said nothing. Then they came for the Jews. I was not a Jew, so I said nothing. And then they came for me, and there was nobody left to speak. We need to speak, and we need to speak every single time. If we don't, what's going to end up happening is it's going to become a country that is not going to live up ever to the ideals that we all hold so dear.
Amen. Amen. Let me just say to you, I almost didn't want to speak tonight. My niece wanted me to speak. And I was at the point where, why bother? Nothing's going to change. And that was me, although I knew better. So I prayed about it for myself. Carl Rowan wrote a book, the newspaper. He's been gone for a while. His book is titled The Upcoming Race War in America. And what he says in that book is that the race war will not come from blacks. The race war will come from whites. My concern is the violence on the other side. And how do we stand against it? How do we stand or communicate with those individuals that we're trying to speak to now who won't listen? And I just have to hope and pray that they do. I do believe there will be more violence. Do I want it? Absolutely not. But I do believe that they will. I think they're armed and ready. They have been armed and ready for a number of years now. If you go back to Timothy McVeigh, when he blew up the federal building years ago, I don't know if you were around then, that has been going on for a long time. What have we done to contain it, stop it, etc.? I'm not sure anymore. I think people know that they're out there. My concern that the rule of law is no longer in place here in the United States. And so that's what I fear the most. And how do we respond? I do think conversations like this is extremely important. I think the majority community needs to wake up and really understand how in danger we all are. And not sure, but I do believe there will be more violence, unfortunately. But I think there's always a way out. And I think talking and communicating like this gives me hope. Not sure anymore. But tonight you guys gave me hope that I didn't have yesterday. I thought I had it the day before, then I lost it. So I think I get it back and forth. It's true. Remember, I grew up in segregation, so I saw a lot of violence then. I think about my uncle who, my mother's uncle actually, who the Ku Klux Klan, many of you haven't seen. I see it now. I see him in the police force. I see him in these other arenas that they've infiltrated. And what they did to my uncle, I call him my uncle, he was great uncle. They got drunk in the town one night and tied him to the railroad track and watched the train drive over him. There are people like that. My fear is that there might be more people than I think. My hope is not, but tonight you guys gave me a lot more hope than I had before. So let's see what happens. I hope you're right and I'm wrong.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Also, this is our other panelist, Callie. She's always late to the party. And I want to thank Alexis. Any last words at all?
Yeah, I just want to thank our panelists tonight. I enjoy having discussions like these. I feel like having this is a way for people to be open to change. And it makes me want to have more conversations like this because it allows for people to gain more perspective and have a different point of view, or at least be open to the conversation. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and I hope you tune in tomorrow night for our discussion on race and media. And I appreciate everyone for just participating and being involved and engaged tonight. So thank you all.
Thank you all. This was an honor.
Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I hope I can keep in touch with you all. Really, you've got magic, and I want some.
Thank you. So do you.
Who knew Hobart had such great faculty? I love this.